Hey guys, this is Brent Sachs. Still don't have a clever name for my YouTube channel, and I've been doing this for like 5 years, so you'd think if I was ever going to come up with one, I would have done it already, but thanks for tuning in. This is going to be a little something new for my channel, so for any subscribers out there who are here for some film analysis, I hope you'll stick around for some video game analysis. I've wanted to create videos about video games since before I ever made any film videos. I never explored how to do it until recently, and now I'm excited to share my very first one. Let's talk about Ghost Recon Future Soldier. Future Soldier is a 2012 entry into a long-running series of the sprawling Tom Clancy universe. The Ghost Recon series has evolved over the years, but at its core, it's a series of military shooting games with a mix of stealthy sneaking, explosive firefights, and bleeding-edge gadgets and tech. In my mind, Future Soldier lives on not just as one of the finest in the series, but one of my favorite shooters of all time. Coincidentally, it's about to turn 10 years old. I want to dive into it, explain where I think it goes right, and contextualize it in the bigger picture of the Ghost Recon series and the broader gaming industry. In today's day and age, Future Soldier is something of a treat. It boasts an exhilarating, taut single-player story mode, full of meticulously designed combat encounters and bombastic set pieces. Of note, it's a linear game, which some might view as primitive or quaint in an era where dozens of franchises have expanded into open-world sandbox games, including the follow-up entries in the Ghost Recon series. I have issues with open-world games, and I'm not the only one. Now, don't get me wrong, some of my all-time favorite games are open world. But the all-too-familiar Ubisoft-style open-world sandbox games with dozens of hours of samey content don't always justify their existence. And I think the AAA games industry is starved for shorter, more tailored, more focused games. The older I get, the more digestible I want my experiences. I have an embarrassing amount of games to get through on my backlog, and the longer ones are so daunting purely because of the time commitment. I'm here to celebrate Future Soldier and not bash the other games in the series, but part of my fondness for Future Soldier is retroactive. It stacks up so much better against its successors, Wildlands and Breakpoint. I played a supremely disappointing demo of Wildlands, and never bothered with Breakpoint. I couldn't believe my eyes when I sampled it. Here was a sequel that had everything handed to it: gameplay polished to a mirror sheen, great animations and motion capture, terrific weapons, tight controls, and all they needed to do was expand it into an open world game. Honestly, I was stoked for that game, and I eagerly awaited it prior to its release. In theory, the formula should work brilliantly. If the game played as well as Future Soldier, but divvied up across one big, beautiful open world with a good story, it should be a slam dunk. Or that was the thought anyway. What immediately defeated it was its bungling of the fundamentals: move, aim, shoot. It felt wrong, looked wrong. Clunky, stilted, rough. I couldn't get into it. Compared to Future Soldier, which is buttery, silky smooth, it was unforgivable. Regardless of whether the story was good or the missions connected well, no matter if the open world's myriad elements were stitched together with any level of competence, the fundamental gameplay felt wrong. How could they take so many steps backward? How could the core gameplay turn out worse instead of the same or better? Again, this is not a video about Wildlands. I don't own it, and I'm not doing a compare and contrast. But I will speculate for a minute. I think the game lacked focus. I think it's emblematic of a shift towards sprawling, open-world game design across an industry that is too preoccupied with whether it could conceive of a game as a sandbox that it doesn't always consider whether or not it should. Furthermore, I think the industry is stuck in this way of thinking because it believes its customers crave an endless train of open-world games. Look no further than Ghost Recon Wildlands. Open world does not a good game make. When you take your eye off the ball, cramming your game full of content for the sake of size and length, you may find yourself failing on the fundamentals. So let's dive into Future Soldier. This game is obviously well cared for. It is apparent to me that the dev team did yeoman's work testing it, refining it, researching it, and poured their hearts into it. Some of this is intangible. It's not a slam dunk that this game feels better to play than Wildlands, and most other shooters for that matter, but I'm going to try to explain it. The controls are perfect. Shooter fans will be familiar with two general ways of aiming your gun. You either hold down the left trigger, or you click in the right thumbstick. Future Soldier unconventionally uses both controls. The left trigger brings your gun up to your shoulder, and clicking in the stick shifts to a first-person view to aim down the sights or optics on your gun. Wildlands, for example, used the exact same system. but transitions felt clunky and jittery. Future Soldier is buttery smooth, and the system of aiming is implemented exceptionally well. It corresponds roughly to 3 ways of shooting guns in real life, those being from the hip, from the shoulder, and aiming down sights. In the game, each one leverages accuracy or speed. Right here, I get taken by surprise. Watch me fire from the hip, where split seconds mean life or death. But notice I'm firing blind for a moment before the crosshair appears on the screen, and shots fly wide. Hold the left trigger for a tighter shot group, and retain some peripheral vision, but you have to have time to spare. Click the thumbstick to raise your weapon and hit with the most range and precision, but it takes time and narrows your view. These are all mechanics that manifest in moment-to-moment gameplay and constantly require you to quickly react and employ your weapons carefully. Some of this is incredibly esoteric even for me, but some of this is a testament to how refined the controls really are. If you're in cover and you click the stick, you automatically pop up and zoom in without needing to use any other control input. Further, the way they map the different aiming and buttons cleverly reduces the overall number of controls to hold, press, or release. It's all just tight, it's well thought out, and it's smart. Minimizing redundant control inputs is great game design. Now, shooters over the years have generally fallen into one of 2 camps when it comes to weapons. Either the weapons featured are vastly different and suited for niche circumstances, like how Halo games have 1 assault rifle, 1 pistol, 1 sniper rifle, etc., or they're more traditional, with fewer attributes which distinguish them from one or the other. In those games, whether you take the ACR or the 417 may not make much of an impact on the gameplay. In Future Soldier, every weapon has a couple of stats that genuinely change how they feel to use apart from one another, and it also introduces the acclaimed Gunsmith mode, which lets you tweak weapons in fun and meaningful ways. You can alter your weapons to your playstyle, prioritizing the stats you care about, or you can experiment and just have fun with new stuff. Maybe you're like me and you undergas your weapons so they fire slower and are more controllable. But then you experiment with an overgassed gun, and you realize that'll put a grin right on your face. The Gunsmith is so well implemented. The interface is a little busy at first, but once you get the hang of it, you'll be tricking out your guns in no time. They also brilliantly include a gun range to test your mods on. It features all these different ranged targets, which is super helpful. I appreciate how they load you in with whatever gun you were altering already equipped, even if it's your secondary weapon. What I mean is, some games would spawn you in with your primary weapon and make you switch guns first, since, hey, I just loaded a new levels start with the primary gun equipped, let's hand Kozak his primary weapon. But not this game. Just smart. I do have some quibbles with Gunsmith. Perhaps understandably, they make certain things options in Gunsmith that other games just make universal. Assigning your weapon's fire mode from Gunsmith by swapping the trigger group isn't how most guns work in real life, and being able to select fire on the fly, like in Rainbow Six, is useful as well as authentic. Same could be said for sound suppressors, although messing with those in the field is a dicier real-world proposition. The devs deserve a lot of credit for making every weapon worth using and every gadget serve a purpose. It's not the most expansive weapon roster I've ever seen, but there are no duds.
This is a whole lot of Russians! Yeah, it's Moscow!
In a shooter, players should feel dangerous. Every gun should make you feel lethal, and they do. They look great, feel great, and sound great.
Hostile down! Engage the vehicle! Taking heavy fire! Stand by, I'll clear him! Gotta reload!
Speaking of tiny things that measurably impact shooting, I also love how the game gives you the common stand, crouch, prone options, but they all offer uncommon trade-offs. In this case, the trade-offs are between mobility and stability. On the ground, you can't move or aim very quickly, but your shots are super precise and very controlled. The difference is stark, and the player can feel the change. Movement mechanics are great. You've got your normal walk, run, crouch, and crawl, but you've also got little rolls and dive rolls you can call up. And you can sprint or rush, as the game calls it. You can stick to cover, rush from cover to cover, and vault frontwards or backwards over obstacles. Motion capture for the game was actually done by Navy SEALs, and honestly, it shows. The ghosts all move authentically and animate fluidly. Characters look the part, which helps the player feel the part. The rush mechanic especially is fast and frenetic, zooming in the camera and making it hard to steer. Cover-based shooters get criticized for turning into static shooting galleries where characters just stick behind cover and alternate popping their heads out until one of them dies. But Future Soldier keeps things engaging by bringing your squad into it, displaying decent enemy AI, and including some smart features to incentivize players to move around and lean on their team. You can get effectively pinned down by machine gun or sniper fire, which zooms the camera in until you can't see the battlefield or issue orders, and it lends a white-knuckle feel to some of the hairier gunfights. Your camera shakes, your aim gets thrown way off, and you're basically powerless until you move out of the way or get help from a teammate. It's a great little inclusion to the combat, which immerses the player both visually and in the context of gameplay. The cover system is another thing that the game just gets right. Players who have experienced lots of cover-based shooters over the years will know what I mean. You can freely rotate the camera and aim in any direction without the game resisting you on it, and all it takes is a simple tap of the A button to either stick or unstick from cover. Would you rather just flick the joystick away from the wall? Done. It's not earth-shattering game design here, people. It's just smart and intuitive. Everything works exactly the way it would in your dreams, because the devs love you and they just want you to be happy. Gameplay ricochets back and forth between stealthy sections and all-out gunfights. The missions do a good job of forcing you to play both ways, and it makes both flavors equally enjoyable and rewarding. Stealth mechanics are pretty readable to the player. You get your detection warning and a little leeway between being spotted and the whole zip code being alerted to your presence, so you can clean up after yourself if you make a mistake. You get a stealth kill option if you come up to unaware enemies, but purely because it's cool, the game gives you the option to melee kill them or shoot them with your suppressed gun. The game gives you a few useful reconnaissance tools, which give you a competitive edge, but don't break the game either. Constraints like no alarms allowed give you a reason to approach scenarios sneakily, but even when you're not forced to, it's usually a good idea to soften up crowds of enemies as best you can before things turn sideways. Once the game eases you into the stealth mechanics, they start ramping up the difficulty of different scenarios where enemies have overlapping sectors, or too many guards for your sync shot, or enemies too far away to shoot. It gets genuinely tricky. Speaking of sync shots, this is another mechanic that works really well. On the surface, we get to tag enemies for our team to all whack simultaneously. Control-wise, they did a really good job here, and you get this neat slow-mo window right after you pull it off for a couple last-second shots while enemies are still stunned. But also, it's just clever. For instance, your teammates will automatically kill targets if they are about to spot you.
Careful, they're gonna spot you. Kill confirmed.
You can order your teammates to kill enemies without needing to assign all 4 slots, and it doesn't require your participation at all. You can also claim one of your teammates' marks for yourself, and they'll automatically just acquire the other one. It's a really tight, really polished system that tells me the devs took it 1 layer, 2 layers, and then 3 layers deep, and really fleshed out the most of it. Because the game is focused. Firefights can quickly get away from you, and the game is never more thrilling than when all hell breaks loose.
He's carrying a shield! It's starting to break! Keep it up!
Battles are loud and intense, and your allies will bark a mix of helpful callouts and other chatter to put you in the scene.
Heads up, they're moving! Go, Dylan! Shield! Watch it! Where? Right! Cover, I'm moving!
Guns sound great, and explosions look and sound awesome.
Suppressing! Target down! We're in control now! Target the vehicle! Going! Get that target!
When you combine the incredible animations, the graphics, the gunfire, the dialogue, and the frenzied camera, and sometimes even the music, you get a truly kinetic experience.
Engage my target! Copy! Right ahead!
Another thing that gives you a competitive edge but doesn't break the game is the active camo. It looks like it'd either be game-breaking or gimmicky, but it's really neither. The devs were smart with putting limitations on it, and even when it works, enemies can still spot you in it. But for it to work, you can't be moving while standing, you can't be shooting, and enemies can't know your location. Visually, it's pretty sweet, and it enables you to pull off missions that would be hopeless otherwise. But the game is smartly designed around the camo, such that it's instrumental to gameplay, but not a crutch. For a 10-year-old game, a lot of it has aged flawlessly. I love the visual design. Check it out. In this scene, we've got a marvelous explosion, helicopters colliding, dirt on the lens, great motion capture, light rays streaming in through the haze,
all right. What's the plan?
Plan is to get you home. First step is to
The
get out.
flames,
Let's move to that
the
hangar.
smoke. You've got debris falling. It looks superb. Some of the environments make more of an impression than others, but there are some standouts. The game's textures are pretty nicely detailed, especially on character models where it counts the most. And the use of light and shadow is frankly impressive. It's a shame this game didn't get the Xbox One X enhanced treatment, at least not at the time of this writing, because I'm sure it would measure up great if it did. Their decision to go with a minimalist HUD is terrific, with the on-screen elements being representation of the Ghost's augmented reality displays from their gear. It shows you, the player, only exactly what you need to see and nothing else, which today is a little more common, but man, it works so well here. It's also full of tons of little flourishes. Most guns have distinct reload animations, which sometimes gets fudged or overlooked entirely in third-person shooters. Character's breath is visible in cold levels. Grime and water and frost are visible on the imaginary camera lens, and the effect is just excellent. Characters even have their fingers straight and off the trigger when grabbing ammo from crates. The cutscenes are pretty good. Nothing special, but it's interesting to me that they constructed them in a handheld camera style, and many, if not all of them, are single-take shots where the camera dollies around but doesn't cut much. I think it lends a nice sense of realism to the events on screen, kind of inserting us there, especially when combined with the lens effects that make it seem like a real camera was used. The sound design is really good. I mentioned already how loud and intense fights get, but I also like how we get a little ambient environmental noise to ease us into missions during loading screens. I love the voice actors. Their line reads are really good, and sometimes pretty funny too.
Millions of dollars floating around in space and still can't beat just going to see for yourself.
I appreciate how they'll call out contextually accurate information on enemies, and that these callouts change depending on if you're undetected or engaged.
Got a grunt here, right next to the car. We've got contact straight ahead.
What's your count?
4 riflemen.
I'm moving.
Guns all sound good and meaty for the most part, and their noises sound different when you're outdoors versus indoors.
Roger! Hostile pickup! Watch it! Stay in formation. Don't let them break through. Target down! They're trying to flank left! Hit him hard!
The music is okay. Some of it is perfectly adequate background noise, but there are some standouts, such as the really moody Firefly Rain mission.
Mark 2. Holding for your shot.
Ready.
And the shootout where we meet the enemy Spec Ops team for the first time. These awesome strings come in that perfectly capture the scene and the mood. A mix of eerie, uncomfortable, urgent Eastern European flavor.
Shit, we're riding the kill zone! Cover to cover, work your way out!
A sound that's old and traditional, but for a futuristic fighting force.
Hostile down! Dead ahead! Hostile rifleman! To the Spec Ops! They got me! We gotta reel it now! Get ahead! Visual identified! Gotta be Spec Ops! They're moving to cover! Smoke one! The first thing! Contact! Smoke pump! Assault rifle! Hostile down! We're tearing him up! Hostile tank!
So I've spent a lot of time talking about how the individual pieces of this game hold up, but how do they work together as a package deal? The campaign experience is rock solid. The story is good. The mission briefings are delivered a little quickly, but it's not as much of a fire hose of information as I remembered. It's not like the Modern Warfare trilogy was, for example, where you could barely make out what the heck was going on because they just blitzed through the mission briefing so fast. The plot centers around the Ghosts trying to unravel what happened when a mission goes wrong, and a bomb kills one of their teams, Eventually, we find out a Russian separatist group is behind the events, and when your team starts to tighten the noose around them, they spring their plan to depose the Russian government and install a junta. Your team intervenes, helping the Russian government retaliate in some really memorable moments, as well as decapitating the leadership of the splinter group, eventually fading into the shadows with the world unaware of your involvement. It's pretty good stuff, and the Russian notes, it hit different, as the kids say, with the Ukraine invasion in February. One of the standout levels in the campaign comes near the end, where you stalk the streets of Moscow and dispatch the Ravensrock forces before they can clash with a procession of Russian loyalist forces who are now reunited with the president that you helped free from prison. It's accompanied by some goofy, on-the-nose cutaways to a news reporter about how there's been no resistance and gee, I wonder why. But it's fascinating to picture a similar situation happening with, just throwing an idea out there, Vladimir Zelensky or something. That, and it's just supremely cool to imagine American special operators creeping through Moscow with active camo, tipping the scales while Russian rebels and loyalists duke it out for control of their country. The characters are realized pretty well. We get a very unrealistic but appreciated scene of Ghost Lead calling home to his kid on a cell phone in a helicopter. Kozak speaks Russian and gets to be the polite face relating to a Russian general, the Russian president, and even a Russian guard who he gets the drop on but doesn't kill. Isn't he such a mensch?
2 огневые точки. Ваши люди должны быть в безопасности.
Да, меня доложили враг. Мы нас пытаем. Где вы?
Мы уже отступили.
Не знаю. Но злые ступайте, будьте осторожнее. Я уже патрулировал до взвода стычка в Рышкеме, стоя паями возле периметра.
Спасибо за предупреждение. Удачи.
Вам также. Той бойовой не бойли. Я ценю вашу помощь.
Вы наш герой, господин генерал. Не будем вам мешать. Конец связи.
I keep saying this, but one of the things I love the campaign for is its focus. Sometimes it's a stealth game. Sometimes it's a hectic game. And sometimes it lets you choose. But it's not coloring outside those lines. There's no collectibles, no loot, no items, no crafting, no leveling up gear, no open world, no moral choice system, just a story, linear levels, and banging gunfights. And man, do they get gnarly.
I think he wants it! Get down! Get down! Cover the VIP! Engage! Engage! Returning fire! Go! 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 You alright? I'm fine. Keep moving! What? Take down that door! Get the top of your gun! Yeah! Give him hell, son!
Call of Duty's Modern Warfare trilogy boasts some inspired set-piece battles, and they get increasingly outlandish as the games go on. But while Future Soldier undeniably plays a few notes out of the Modern Warfare sheet music, they stick things a little closer to reality, and the game never shows you a set-piece that doesn't feature player control. There are a variety of firefights in this game, which are just mayhem, but they come up with ways to raise the stakes without snatching control away from you like, hey, watch this cool thing we came up with. It's more like, fight for your life in a deteriorating building while a tank tries to bring it down on top of you. Hole up in a Russian burger joint while waves of enemies in armor come at you. Grab this VIP and keep him safe while hordes of enemies descend on you. Eminently memorable, intense, challenging, and all player-controlled events. Future Soldier isn't perfect, but most of my negative feedback is pretty inconsequential. We get cool little team animations of a couple different varieties that are employed to hide loading times, which is cool and all, but it's not great when the animation ends and the game resumes loading some more. Some of the editing in the game is super abrupt and jarring, specifically after certain cutscenes or missions end. Like, what was that? Sometimes your allies will take cover in the exact same spot as you, which, aside from looking silly, can also cause movement issues. The move to cover feature is generally reliable, but sometimes it is impossible to get it to register the location you want to run to. There are a couple moments where you have to steer a missile during an airstrike, and one in particular barely lets you steer at all, and then it detonates an airburst, taking out every target regardless of where you pointed it, which at that point, you might as well not even take me out of the fight to steer. Seeing it all happen from the ground view would have been great without the intermission. Ammo crates and weapon boxes are everywhere. I get it, but it's unnecessary. It makes the game easier than it needs to be, although every once in a while, it is nice to restock on gadgets or ammo after a particularly grueling fight, because you will get low. The game opens with a playable prologue, where you watch the Ghost team get blown up by the bomb which triggers the events of the rest of the game, but for some reason, you can't play the prologue again, at least not from any of the menus I looked at. I even hit Start New Campaign instead of Level Select, and it still just put me into the first mission instead of the prologue. It is funny that they make a big deal out of this Bodark tattoo and they zoom in on it, but it's completely illegible. I have no idea what we're looking at here. Like, what? Alright, well, hey, now that I'm officially out of petty critiques, I guess it's time to wrap this, wait, hold on. What's this? DLC? 3 missions? Alright, full disclosure. For as big of a fan as I am, I don't think I knew this existed. $15 is a little steep for 3 missions, but they are advertised as being longer and harder than normal, so I said, okay, show me what you got. No lie, I am impressed. Part of this video is seeing how the game holds up 10 years on, and I truly think it holds up well. Taking these 3 missions fresh, I found them to be engaging, unfamiliar, and hard. The level designs are 3 of the best in the whole lineup. I liked the mission where you don't have your advanced tech, and I like the story reason they contrived to do it to you. I died a lot, and I restarted a lot of checkpoints during these 3. The environments are more open-ended, and the scenarios more difficult. I thought it was largely fair, but there was this one part where you have to sneak across a field, and a freaking helicopter kept spotting me, or nearly spotting me, while camouflaged and crouched, or even crawling, a helicopter in the air. This also happened earlier on with some trucks. I don't know what they did when they built these 3 levels out, but when the hard part is making sure the drivers and pilots aren't spotting you when the infantry don't, it's a little messed up. Still, I had a great time revisiting the same story and characters, but in 3 new chapters I'd never seen before, 10 years on. $15 is more than it should cost to play these 3 missions that undoubtedly were simply trimmed from the final game to be sold separately, and they definitely shouldn't cost $15 now. But I'm glad I took the plunge, and I'd recommend it to anyone like me who hasn't before. Okay, I'll wrap this up. Thank you for anyone who watched this far, and if you don't own it, go buy Future Soldier and take it for a spin. If you do own it, don't you think you're overdue for another go?
Positive ID on Repco. Take him out and check his body for the hard drive. Contact! 12 o'clock! Focus on that vehicle! Roger! 12 o'clock! Rifleman!